The dog hit the ground running before anyone gave the order. That was the first thing Lieutenant Marcus Webb noticed. He stood at the edge of the training yard at Naval Special Warfare Command, San Diego, watching the Belgian Malinois named Ghost move like water through an obstacle course that had broken 3 handlers in the last month. The dog was not running for the treat in the trainer's hand. The dog was running because something in the air had changed, something the humans in the yard had not felt yet. Then Petty Officer Second Class Danny Reyes walked through the gate. She was not supposed to be there. That was the second thing Webb noticed. Before we go any further, if you found this channel and this is your first time here, take a moment right now and hit that subscribe button. Stories like this one take real work to build, and there are more of them coming every week. Drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you are watching from. People leave comments from places you would never expect, and that honestly makes this worth doing. Now let us get back to the yard. Danny Reyes was 29 years old. She stood 5 feet 4 inches and weighed 130 pounds in full gear. She had short dark hair, brown eyes that moved quickly across every room she entered, and a small scar along her left jawline that she never explained. She had transferred to the unit 4 days ago from an assignment that her file described only as Special Operations Support Kandahar. That file was thinner than it should have been for a woman with 8 years of service. Webb had read it twice and still did not understand what she actually did over there. What the file said was that she was a K-9 specialist. What it did not say was anything specific about what that meant. The men in the yard had already made their decisions about Danny Reyes. Senior Chief Petty Officer Roland Brick had made his the moment she arrived and stood in the briefing room without flinching when he explained that this team did not accommodate passengers. Chief Petty Officer Leo Harlan had made his the second he saw her service record and noticed the thin section where combat deployments should have been listed. Petty Officer First Class Jake Tureau had simply laughed once quietly and then said nothing at all, which was worse. The official reason she had been assigned to their unit was because Ghost had become a problem. Ghost was a 7-year-old Belgian Malinois who had been one of the finest military working dogs in the program. He had 3 combat deployments, 2 silver stars awarded to his handlers, and a bite record that the training staff discussed in careful voices. He had also, in the last 6 months, hurt 2 handlers badly enough to end their careers in the dog program, refused 3 assignments in the field, and once held a full team of 6 men in place for 40 minutes during a training exercise because he planted himself in a doorway and would not move, and not one person in the team could figure out what he was telling them. The behavioral specialists had written reports. The reports used words like dissociation and trauma response and decreased operational confidence. Senior Chief Brick had read those reports and called them nonsense. He believed the dog was not broken. He believed the dog was waiting for something that had not arrived yet. He was not wrong, he just did not know that what the dog was waiting for had just walked through the gate. Ghost stopped moving the moment Danny stepped into the yard. He did not bark. He did not growl. He stood completely still for approximately 3 seconds, which the men watching found strange because Ghost did not hold still for anything. Then the dog turned his head directly toward her and his tail moved once slowly. The trainer, a compact man named Corvus, grabbed the leash tighter without thinking about it. Danny did not look at the dog right away. She walked to the edge of the training yard, set her bag down, and signed the entry log that Corvus held out to her. She looked at the clipboard the way someone looks at a thing they are doing while their attention is somewhere else entirely. Then she looked up at the obstacle course and studied it for a moment. Then she looked at Ghost. Ghost looked back. Brick was watching from the upper level of the observation platform. He turned to Webb, that the new handler. "That's her," Webb said. "She know what this dog did to Ramirez. Her file says she was briefed." Brick made a sound that was not quite a word. He looked back down at the yard. "Dog's going to eat her alive," he said. He did not say it with pleasure. He said it the way a man says a thing he believes is true and has already decided he cannot prevent. He was wrong about that too. What happened next in the yard was not dramatic. That was the thing about it that people remembered afterward. There was no cinematic moment. Danny simply walked to a position about 15 feet from where Ghost was standing and stopped. She did not crouch. She did not make any sounds. She did not reach out her hand. She simply stood in that specific position and waited. Ghost looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down. Corvus stared. The dog had not sat on command for anyone in 3 months. The dog had not sat voluntarily for anyone in longer than that. Danny reached slowly into her jacket pocket, pulled out a small object, and held it at her side without offering it. Ghost watched the object. Then Ghost lay down on the ground and put his head on his front paws. "What is she holding?" Webb asked. No one on the platform had an answer. Later that afternoon, Brick called a team meeting in the mission planning room. The team was 8 men plus Danny, who sat at the far end of the table and said nothing while Brick stood at the front and spoke about the upcoming evaluation. The evaluation was a full tactical exercise scheduled for Friday, 3 days away. It would include live K9 integration, which meant Ghost had to perform, which meant whoever was handling Ghost had to perform. The problem was that no one believed Ghost would perform. The worst problem from the team's perspective was that the person who was now officially Ghost's handler was a woman nobody knew, with a file nobody fully understood, who had been inserted into the team over Brick's specific objection. Brick had filed that objection in writing 2 weeks ago. Command had overruled it. That did not help the atmosphere in the room. Turreau leaned back in his chair during the briefing and looked at the ceiling in a way that was technically within conduct, but was clearly a statement. Harlan kept his face neutral but asked 3 questions during the briefing that were structured to emphasize operational risk, and each of them was framed in a way that pointed at Danny without nomming her. Webb watched all of this and said nothing. Webb was a lieutenant, which meant he was the officer in the room, but this team had its own hierarchy that operated at a layer below rank, and he had learned in 6 months with them that the only way to move that hierarchy was through the mission itself. After the briefing, as the team filed out, Brick stopped next to Danny's chair. "I need to be clear with you," he said. "Friday's evaluation involves real stakes. We have a Pentagon assessment team watching. Our unit's deployment classification is up for review. We do not have room for a dog that freezes, and we do not have room for a handler who cannot control that dog under pressure." Danny looked up at him. "I understand," she said. "I'm not sure you do," Brick said. "Ghost put Ramirez in the hospital for 6 weeks. Ramirez was an excellent handler and a good man. If that dog decides he does not want to work on Friday, there is no plan B. I need to know now if you can guarantee he works." Danny was quiet for a moment. "I can't guarantee what the dog does," she said. "No handler can, but I can tell you what I will do and what I have seen Ghost do and what I believe will happen." "What do you believe will happen?" "He'll work," she said. Brick looked at her for a long moment. "That's not enough," he said and walked out. Webb was the last one left in the room. He stayed seated and waited until Brick was gone. Then he looked at Danny. "Can I ask you something off the record?" She glanced at him. "Sure. Where did you and that dog know each other before?" She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Kandahar 8 months ago." "The file doesn't say that." "A lot of my file doesn't say things," she said. Webb nodded slowly. He did not push it. There were things in this work that lived in the white space of documents, in the lines the classification system ate, and he had learned that the absence of information was itself a kind of information. What happened to the handler he was with over there? Her jaw tightened slightly, just slightly. "He didn't come back," she said. Webb sat with that for a moment. "And Ghost?" "Ghost came back," she said, "but he was different." She picked up her bag and left. The next 2 days were tense in ways that built quietly rather than exploding. Danny spent every available hour in the K9 training facility working with Ghost, and what happened between them in those hours was watched by different people with different conclusions. Harlan watched once and reported to Brick that the dog was responsive, but only to her, which was itself a problem because a military working dog needed to function with the full team, not bond exclusively to one individual. Turreau watched once and said the handler was good with the dog, but seemed to have a method nobody else would understand or be able to replicate, which he said was itself a kind of dependency that created fragility in the unit. Corvus, the trainer, watched every session and said nothing to anyone for a full day. Then he found Webb in the hallway and said, "Lieutenant, I have been working with military dogs for 19 years. I do not know exactly what I am looking at, but whatever she is doing with that animal, it is not standard. It is not even close to standard, and it is working." Webb asked what he meant. Corvus thought for a moment. Standard K9 handling is about control, commands, boundaries, compliance. What she is doing is something else. She is not commanding him. She is communicating with him, and he is communicating back. "What are they saying?" Webb asked. Corvus shook his head. "That's the part I can't read," he said. On Thursday morning, the day before the evaluation, something happened that changed everything. The evaluation scenario had been designed by the Pentagon assessment team and sent to the unit command that morning. The team gathered to read it. The scenario involved a simulated compound assault, a hostage recovery under time pressure, and a K9 sweep for a secondary threat that would be hidden in the compound's lower level. The secondary threat was the critical element. The assessment team had designed it to test whether the K-9 unit could operate independently when separated from the main assault element. This was already demanding. What made it worse was the additional detail revealed in the final paragraph of the scenario document. The secondary threat would be a live actor playing a hostile target, armed with a training weapon, who would be given instruction to actively resist the dog and attempt to incapacitate the handler. The actor had been specifically selected because he had experience in K-9 resistance training and had successfully evaded and disabled 3 dogs in previous exercises. The room was quiet when Brick finished reading that paragraph aloud. "They want us to run Ghost against a resistance actor," Harlan said. "That's what it says," Brick replied. "Ghost attacked Ramirez during a training exercise with significantly less pressure than this," Harlan said. "I'm aware," Brick said. Turo spoke. "If the dog goes sideways in front of the Pentagon team, that's not just our evaluation. That's the entire K-9 integration program for this unit." Nobody disputed that. Brick looked at the end of the table where Danny was sitting. "You heard the scenario," he said. "I need an honest answer, not a brave answer. An honest one. Can Ghost handle that resistance actor without endangering the evaluation?" The table was watching her. Danny looked at the scenario document for a moment, then she looked up. "I need to know something about the resistance actor," she said. "What?" "Has he worked against dogs trained in the Kandahar integration protocol?" A short silence. Brick frowned. "That's a very specific question." "Yes," she said. "Has he?" Brick looked at the documents. He looked at the assessment contact number. "I don't know. I can find out." "I need to know that before I can answer your question," she said. Harlan made a quiet sound of frustration. "This is what I mean," he said, not quite to Brick, not quite to the room. "We have a live evaluation in less than 24 hours, and our handler is asking questions about protocols most people in this building have never heard of." "Maybe that should tell you something," Webb said from the corner. It came out of him before he had fully decided to say it, but he did not take it back. Harlan looked at him. "What should it tell me, Lieutenant?" "That she knows something about this dog that the rest of us don't," Webb said, "and maybe we should find out what that is before we decide whether to trust her." That night, Brick called Danny into his office alone. He had made the call. The resistance actor had not worked against dogs trained in the Kandahar integration protocol. He had been told nothing specific about what the Kandahar integration protocol was, only that it was a modified bonding and communication approach that had been piloted with select working dogs in southern Afghanistan between 2019 and 2021. The program had not been widely documented. Most of the documentation that existed was classified at a level that Brick's clearance did not quite reach. This bothered him a lot. He waited until Danny sat down across from him. "Tell me about the Kandahar protocol," he said. She looked at him steadily. "It's not something I can fully brief you on without authorization," she said. "I'm not asking for a classified briefing," he said. "I'm asking you to tell me what I need to know to run this evaluation without something going wrong." She considered this for a moment. The protocol was developed because standard K-9 command structures were failing in certain high-noise, high-stress environments. Dogs were shutting down or becoming unpredictable. The program looked at why. What they found was that the problem wasn't the dogs, it was the communication model. Standard handling assumes the human leads and the dog follows. The Kandahar protocol reverses certain elements of that. The dog is trained to flag threat assessment first, and the handler is trained to read that flag and respond, rather than directing the dog to where the handler thinks the threat is. Brick sat with that. The dog leads the threat assessment. "In specific scenarios, yes," she said. "That's backwards." "It sounds backwards," she said, "but in field conditions where the human handler has incomplete information and the dog's senses are superior, it produces better outcomes. Ghost is one of 6 dogs trained in this protocol. He's the only one still active." "What happened to the other 5? The question sat in the air for a moment. 3 were lost in action," she said. "1 was retired due to injury, 1 is currently in a recovery program." "And the handlers?" Her jaw did the thing it had done before, just slightly, just for a moment. "I was one of 4 handlers trained in the protocol," she said. "The other 3 are no longer active." Brick looked at her for a long time. The office was quiet. Outside the window, the San Diego night was dark and still, and somewhere across the base a vehicle was moving slowly along a perimeter road, its headlights cutting clean lines through the dark. "Who is Ghost Handler in Kandahar?" he asked. "His name was Sergeant First Class Daniel Arroyo," she said. "He was killed during an extraction operation 8 months ago. Ghost was with him when it happened. Ghost completed the extraction. He brought the team home. Then he came back to the staging point and waited for Daniel for 6 hours before anyone could move him." The office was very quiet. "And you were there," Brick said. "I was the secondary handler on the protocol team," she said. "I wasn't in the field that night. I was at staging. I was the one who was there when Ghost came back." Brick looked at his desk. He was not a man who showed emotion easily, and he did not show it now, but something in the set of his face shifted slightly. "That's why he recognized you," he said. "We spent 3 months working together before Kandahar," she said. "He knows me, he trusts me, not because I'm special, because I was part of his world when his world still made sense to him. And now his world doesn't make sense to him anymore," she said. "Standard handling feels wrong to him because it asks him to follow commands in a model that isn't how he was trained to think. It creates conflict. The conflict produces the aggressive behavior." "He's not broken," Brick said slowly. "He was not asking. He's waiting for a context that matches how he was trained," she said. "With me, he has that context. With the right scenario, he'll work exactly the way he was designed to work." Brick sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then he looked at her. "Tomorrow I'm going to put you and that dog in front of a Pentagon assessment team and a resistance actor who is specifically trained to break K9 control. If Ghost goes sideways, it doesn't just affect you and me. It affects every person on this team and the future of our deployment classification." "I know," she said. "If I let you run this, I need to know one thing," he said, "and I need the real answer, not the brave one." "Ask," she said. "Are you ready?" She looked at him. In the office light for just a moment, he could see what she usually kept under the steady expression. Not fear exactly, something heavier than fear, the weight of a thing carried for a long time. "I've been ready since the day I walked off that staging base in Kandahar," she said. "I just needed someone to put me in the right room." Brick nodded once, slowly. "Be in the yard at 0500, he said. The evaluation began at 0800 under a sharp San Diego morning that was clear and cool and smelled of the ocean. The Pentagon assessment team was 3 people: a colonel named Graves, a civilian analyst whose badge said duty, and a quiet woman in a gray suit who never introduced herself and whose presence made the senior staff visibly careful. They sat in the elevated observation section with tablets and notepads and the particular stillness of people who were there to measure rather than experience. The team assembled in the staging area. Brick ran the briefing with his usual economy of language. He assigned positions, confirmed communications, reviewed the extraction route. When he reached the K9 integration portion, he stated that Ghost and his handler would conduct the lower-level sweep independently and report threat assessment to the main element before the element breached the secondary door. He said it the same way he said everything else, as if it were already decided and obviously correct. Harlan noticed the change in how Brick spoke about it. He said nothing, but he noticed. Turo looked at Danny across the staging area. She was running a final equipment check on Ghost's vest. The dog stood absolutely still while she worked, his attention moving slowly around the staging area in that particular pattern that the protocol team had recognized as what they called active low scan, the state in which the dog was fully aware and processing but conserving energy for what came next. Turo had seen a lot of dogs in training. He had seen dogs that were well-trained and dogs that were excellent. He had never seen a dog that looked like it was thinking. He watched for a moment longer than he intended, then he went back to his own equipment check. The scenario began with a vehicle approach and a staged gate breach. The team moved with the precision that came from 100 repetitions of scenarios very much like this one, and for the first 4 minutes everything ran exactly as designed. They cleared the outer perimeter. They moved to the compound structure. The main element stacked on the primary entrance while Danny and Ghost moved to the side entrance that led to the lower level. The lower level was a long concrete corridor with 3 rooms off it and a stairwell at the far end. In standard K9 doctrine, the handler would send the dog ahead on command, call it back, advance, send again. It was a controlled progression that kept the human handler in authority at every step. Danny did not do that. She unclipped Ghost's leash at the entrance to the corridor. Above in the observation area, the duty analyst leaned toward Colonel Graves and said something quietly. Graves watched without responding. Ghost moved forward, not fast, not like a dog that had been sent, like a dog that had decided to move and was moving with intention. He went 8 feet, stopped. His head dropped slightly, his ears shifted. Then he turned and looked back at Danny, and his body position changed in a way that was subtle enough that most people would have missed it entirely. Danny moved forward to a position 6 feet behind him. She touched the radio. Main element, hold breach. Ghost is flagging something in the corridor. Give me 30 seconds. On the tactical radio there was a short silence, then Brick's voice, copy holding. In the observation area, the woman in the gray suit had set down her tablet. Ghost turned back to the corridor. He moved forward again, slower this time, and stopped outside the second door on the left. His body position did the thing again. Danny read it and touched her radio. Threat indicator, room 2, left side. Possible armed position behind the door, northwest corner. On the other side of that door, the resistance actor, a former Marine raider named Costello who had been told to hide in the northwest corner specifically because it was the hardest position for a dog to detect from the doorway, heard the radio transmission through the evaluation monitoring feed, and felt a specific chill that he later described to 2 different people as unlike anything he had experienced in 3 years of resistance training. The door opened. Ghost went through it at a speed that was different from how he had moved in the corridor, not aggressive, focused. He went to the northwest corner in a direct line and stopped 2 feet from Costello and held position with his full attention on the man's hands. Costello raised his training weapon. Ghost did not attack. Ghost stood between Costello and the door and held his position, and the sound he made was low and absolutely clear about what it meant. Danny came through the door 3 seconds behind him. She assessed the room, confirmed the position, and said into the radio, room 2 clear, threat contained, 1 subject, northeast corner. She had misspoken. She said northeast when she meant northwest. It was a small thing, a stress error. She corrected it immediately. Correction, northwest corner, my error. Later, Harlan would tell Brick privately that the self-correction mattered to him. Not because the error had been significant, but because the self-correction was the kind of thing a person did when they were operating honestly under pressure rather than performing for the assessment team. The rest of the scenario completed in 14 minutes. The main element extracted the hostage from the primary room. The secondary sweep completed clean, no simulated casualties, no protocol breaks. Costello, in his post-evaluation debrief with the assessment team, said only one thing that he asked to be put on record. He said that in 22 years of work in various training and operational contexts, he had never been located by a K-9 team that fast with that little noise from that position. The assessment team met for 40 minutes after the scenario ended. The team stood down in the staging area and waited. The waiting was the kind that had weight to it. Brick stood against the wall and drank water and did not speak. Harlan sat on an equipment crate. Turreau stood near the far end of the staging area and at one point walked over to where Ghost was resting and looked at the dog for a moment and then looked at Danny. "Where did you learn to read him like that?" he asked. It was the first thing he had said to her directly since she arrived. She looked at him steadily. "I learned from the person who trained him," she said. "He was better at it than me. I'm still learning." Turreau nodded slowly. He looked at the dog again. Ghost looked back at him with that particular calm attention. "What did he mean when his body did that thing in the corridor?" Turreau asked. "The position shift." She thought about how to explain it. It's close to what a hunting dog does when it locks onto a scent and is uncertain about direction. But with Ghost, it's more specific. It's a communication. He was telling me there was a human presence and that the presence was deliberately concealed. He was also telling me it wasn't moving, which meant waiting rather than fleeing. Turreau was quiet for a moment. "He told you all that?" "It took 3 months to learn to read it," she said, "and I still miss things." "What do you miss?" She was quiet for a moment. "Emotional state," she said. "Daniel was better at that than me. He could read Ghost's emotional register and adjust the approach accordingly. I read the threat signals. The emotional layer is harder for me." Turreau sat with that, then he said, "Daniel was the handler who was killed." She nodded. He looked at the ground for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said. It was a simple thing and he said it simply, and in the context of everything that had happened in the 4 days since she had arrived, it meant something. She nodded again. The assessment team came back. Colonel Graves spoke first to Brick and then to the assembled team. He spoke about operational performance and evaluation metrics and the specific results of the scenario. He used the measured language of formal assessment. Then he paused and said something that was not in the formal language. He said that in his 14 years of overseeing unit evaluations, he had seen K9 integration performed at a high level many times. He said that what he had observed today was not at a high level. He said it was at a different level. Then he said that the unit's deployment classification was confirmed, and he shook Brick's hand and the assessment team left. Brick stood in the staging area for a moment after they were gone. Then he looked at Danny. He did not say anything immediately. He looked at Ghost, who was sitting next to her, relaxed and calm in the way he had not been calm for the 6 months before she arrived. Brick looked at the dog for a long moment. Then he said, "Good work." He said it to both of them. He walked away before Danny could respond. Harlan was the next person to speak. He came over and stood in front of her, and he did not look comfortable doing it, but he did it anyway. "I owe you a professional apology," he said. "I made assumptions based on incomplete information, and I let those assumptions affect my behavior in a way that wasn't fair to you or to the team." She looked at him. "You were trying to protect the mission," she said. "That's not an excuse," he said. "No," she agreed, "but it's a reason. I understand the difference." He nodded. He did not try to make it into more than it was, and she did not invite him to. They were people who had a long way to go before they were truly a functioning unit, and both of them understood that it would be built in small moments like this one rather than in any single larger resolution. Over the next 3 weeks, the team worked together with Danny and Ghost integrated into their structure, and the integration was neither easy nor perfectly smooth. There were 2 training sessions where Ghost's communication signals were missed by team members who had not yet learned to read them, and both sessions produced friction and a long debrief with Danny explaining for the 3rd and 4th time what specific signals meant and what the appropriate response was. Turo proved to be the fastest learner among the team. Harlan proved to be the most resistant, not from hostility but from a deeply held preference for established doctrine that made non-standard methods feel unreliable to him regardless of their results. Brick proved to be something that surprised Webb, which was that the senior chief was genuinely curious. He asked Danny questions in quiet moments, methodical and specific questions, and he listened to the answers with the attention of a man who was updating something internal that he kept carefully private. Webb watched all of this and did his job and occasionally said something that moved a situation forward when it had stalled. 4 weeks after the evaluation, the unit received a deployment notice. An operational tasking in a mountain region near the Afghan-Pakistan border that the notice described in spare language as a personnel recovery mission requiring multimodal assault capability and K9 integration at high altitude. High altitude meant thin air. Thin air affected both human performance and K9 performance. The compound identified in the mission intelligence was on a ridge at approximately 9,000 feet, which was at the upper edge of confident operational range for the kind of work Ghost had been designed to do. Brick noted this in the mission planning session and looked at Danny. She had already pulled the relevant data on Ghost's performance history at altitude. She had cross-referenced it with his current recovery status and his behavioral indicators from the past month. She had a number. "He's effective up to about 9,200 feet based on his documented history," she said. "The compound is at 8,800. We have margin, but it's not wide." "How does altitude affect the protocol communication?" Webb asked. "It reduces his window," she said. "At altitude, his scent processing drops, which means his confidence interval on threat signals is wider. He'll flag things he's less certain about, which means I have to calibrate my response accordingly." "What does that mean operationally?" Brick asked. "It means I'll call holds more conservatively," she said, "and it means there's a higher chance of a false positive flag which costs us time. I'll factor that into the timeline estimate." Brick looked at the mission map. "How much time does the conservative approach add?" 4 to 6 minutes on the K9 sweep element, she said. Brick nodded. He adjusted the timeline in the planning document. Nobody in the room challenged it. This was different from 4 weeks ago. Webb noticed it. He filed it away. The night before deployment, Webb found himself in the hangar where the transport was being loaded, running a final equipment check, and Danny was there doing the same thing in her section of the load plan. Ghost was in his transport crate nearby, alert and watching the hangar activity with his steady attention. Webb worked for a while, then he said without looking up from the equipment list, "Are you nervous?" She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "About the altitude?" he asked. "About what happens if I miss something," she said. The margin for error up there is different than it is here, and Ghost will be working harder than he does at sea level. That means I have to work harder too. You've done this before, he said. I've done versions of it, she said. Not exactly this. Every operational environment is different. Webb nodded. He checked off something on his list. Can I ask you something personal? Go ahead, she said. Why did you come back to this after Kandahar? She was quiet for a moment, and in the hangar the sounds of loading continued around them, the equipment being secured, the voices of the logistics crew in the background, and Ghost shifted in his crate and watched her with his calm, reading attention. Because Ghost came back, she said, and he shouldn't have to spend the rest of his working life being broken by handlers who don't understand what he is. He deserved to have someone with him who could do the work the right way. That's the only reason, Webb asked. She looked at him. Daniel trained me to do this, she said. Not me specifically, but the method, the protocol. He spent years developing it, and he believed it was important, and he was right. If I stop, the protocol stops. There's nobody else. That's a lot to carry, Webb said. It's not a burden, she said. It's a reason. Webb looked at Ghost in the crates. The dog looked back at him with that particular quality of attention that the dog had, the quality of a mind that was running something complex and quiet. He really was telling you about the room, Webb said. It was not quite a question. He was, she said. Everything you said he was telling you. Yes, she said. Webb nodded slowly. I believe you, he said. For what it's worth, I believed you before the evaluation. I wasn't sure I was right to. You were, she said. I know, he said. He finished the equipment check and closed the folder. Get some sleep, he said, both of you. The deployment was 14 hours of movement and 1 hour of preparation and 22 minutes of operation. The mountain at night was cold in a way that the body argued with and the mind had to override. The team moved up the ridge approach in the dark with the specific economy of people who had trained enough that efficiency was no longer a decision but a condition. Ghost moved at Danny's left side in the loose heel position that the protocol used for approach movement, and his breathing was slightly elevated from the altitude but controlled, and his scan pattern was the one she had learned to read as active approach, which meant he was processing and ready and not flagging anything yet. The compound sat on the ridge like something that had grown there rather than been built, low stone walls and a main structure and 2 outbuildings, and the intelligence suggested 3 to 5 armed individuals and 2 personnel recovery subjects in the main structure. The intelligence was 4 days old. That meant anything could have changed. The team reached the outer perimeter and held. Danny watched Ghost. Ghost held the loose heel and his head turned slowly to the left, stopped. His ear position changed. His body position did the first version of the flag, the uncertain direction flag, which meant he had detected something human, but the location confidence was low. Danny touched her radio. Main element hold. Ghost is flagging human presence, low confidence on direction. Give me 2 minutes. Brick's voice was very quiet. Copy holding. Ghost stood still. His head moved in small increments. Danny watched and waited and trusted the dog to finish what he was doing before she asked him to confirm. This was the thing that standard K9 doctrine would not have allowed. Standard doctrine would have prompted the handler to command the dog to a specific direction and send him. Danny knew that sending him before he had resolved the direction uncertainty would produce exactly the kind of conflict that had been breaking him for months. She waited. 90 seconds passed. Ghost's body position shifted to the second flag. Direction confirmed. He oriented toward the left outbuilding. Danny had the intelligence map in her head. The left outbuilding was not identified as a structure of interest. The intelligence team had assessed it as a storage space. She said into the radio, Ghost is flagging the left outbuilding, possible human presence, not consistent with current intel. There was a short silence, then Brick said, how confident? Direction 2 flag, she said. That's his higher confidence signal. Another short silence. Can you take the building with him before main element moves? She looked at the outbuilding, 40 feet across open ground. The building had 1 door and 2 small windows on the visible side. She did not know the ground on the far side. She did not know what the human presence in the building was. She knew what Ghost was telling her, and she knew that the Direction 2 flag had a strong track record. And she knew that if she was wrong and the main element moved on the primary structure while something in that outbuilding responded, the situation would become very bad very quickly. She also knew that sending two people, including herself, to check an outbuilding while the main element held on an open ridge was its own risk. She made the decision in about 4 seconds. "I'll take it," she said. "Keep the main element on the primary hold." She looked at Turreau, who was closest to her on the approach line. He had read the radio exchange. He moved to her position without being told. That was not in the plan, and it was the right call, and they both understood that without speaking. They crossed the 40 feet in a low, direct approach, with Ghost moving in the position he used for close target work, slightly ahead and offset, and when they reached the wall of the outbuilding, Ghost's body position went to the third flag, which Danny had seen twice before and which meant immediate proximity and high confidence. She and Turreau stacked on the door. Turreau on the pole, Danny center, Ghost at her left ready. Turreau pulled the door. Inside the outbuilding were two people, a man and a child. The man was one of the personnel recovery subjects. He had separated from the second subject at some point in the last 4 days in a development the intelligence had not captured, and he had been hiding in the outbuilding for at least 2 days based on what Danny could assess from the condition of the space. The child was his. She was approximately 6 years old. Both of them were alive. Both of them were terrified of the dog. Ghost sat down. He did not advance. He did not hold the position he held with Costello. He sat and he looked at the child, and something in his position was the complete opposite of threat. Danny did not know how to explain afterward what exactly changed in Ghost's body language when he looked at that child. She had never seen it before. She described it as something between recognition and gentleness and deliberate calm, which was not a description that satisfied the debrief team, but which Turreau confirmed in his own debrief as accurate. The child stopped crying. The man looked at Ghost. He looked at Danny. He said something in Dari that her language support couldn't fully parse, but which contained the word for safe repeated twice. They extracted him and the child through the secondary approach route, while the main element breached the primary structure and recovered the second subject and cleared the compound in 8 minutes. On the ridge, moving down in the dark toward the extraction point, the cold mountain pressing in around them, Ghost walked at her left side in the loose heel, and his scan pattern had shifted to the one she thought of as done and certain and still paying attention, the pattern he used after a successful operation when he knew the immediate work was finished, but his mind had not yet turned off. She thought about Daniel. She thought about the conversation they had had once, very late at night on the Kandahar base, when he had said that the remarkable thing about working with Ghost was not the dog's capability, which was extraordinary, but the dog's intentionality. He had said that Ghost understood what the work was for, not in a human way, but in a dog way, which was perhaps cleaner and more direct. He understood that the work was about finding people and that finding people mattered, and he brought everything he was to that understanding every single time. She had asked Daniel once if he was ever afraid that something would happen to Ghost. He had said that was the wrong thing to be afraid of. He said the thing worth being afraid of was failing to use what Ghost was offering. He said the dog showed up every time and gave everything every time, and the only failure worth fearing was the human side of the partnership. She had thought about that conversation many times since Kandahar. She thought about it on the ridge in the dark, with the mountain air thin around her and Ghost moving steadily at her left side and the extraction point coming closer in the dark. She thought about it again 6 weeks later, when the debrief reports were finalized and the K9 protocol was recommended for formal review and possible expanded implementation, and Brick came to find her in the K9 facility and told her that Command had asked whether she would be willing to brief the program to a wider audience. She looked at him. What audience? Training Command, he said. They want to understand what we used. They want to assess whether it can be applied more broadly. She thought about it. Daniel spent 5 years building this, she said. He deserved to be the one doing this briefing. Brick was quiet for a moment. He's not here, he said. You are. She looked at Ghost, who was watching them both from his resting position with his alert, reading attention. I know, she said. Brick waited. Yes, she said, I'll brief it. He nodded. He turned to leave and then stopped. He looked at her for a moment, and this was the kind of look that Brick rarely offered, the kind that came without the professional distance. For what it's worth, he said, I was wrong about you, not about the concern. The concern was legitimate, but about you, I was wrong. She looked at him. She did not tell him it was fine. She did not tell him it didn't matter. She did not perform gracious acceptance of an apology that she had not needed to perform. She simply said, I know you were. He nodded. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. He left. Webb, who had been in the far end of the facility and had heard none of the words but had seen the shape of the conversation, walked over after Brick left and looked at Danny. "What was that about?" he asked. "He apologized," she said. "How'd you take it?" "Honestly," she said. Webb nodded. He looked at Ghost. The dog looked back at him, and Webb had by now spent enough time around Ghost to read some of the basic signals, and what he read in that moment was the dog in the state of settled and present, which was the state Ghost was in more and more often now, which was itself a measurement of something important. "You know what the debrief team asked me," Webb said. "What?" "They asked if I thought the protocol was replicable, if it could be taught to other handlers." "What did you say?" "I said I didn't know," he said, "and then they asked what the critical variable was, what the single most important thing was that made it work." "What did you say to that?" He looked at her. "I said I thought it was trust," he said, "not the handler trusting the dog trusting the handler, and that the trust had to be earned the right way." She looked at him for a moment, then she looked at Ghost. "That's not wrong," she said. "The reason I'm telling you," he said, "is that I've been in the Navy for 11 years and I've trusted a lot of people in the field, and I've had that trust work and I've had it not work. And the thing that I think is true about trust in this context is that you have to be willing to know the real cost of what happens when it breaks." She waited. "After Kandahar," he said carefully, "Ghost knew the real cost, and he came back anyway." She was quiet for a long moment. "He always does," she said. "There is a question that the people involved in this story carry with them that does not have a clean answer. The question is about what constitutes proof. Roland Brick had a doctrine and a method and a professional life built on them, and he was right about Ghost in the essential way, which was that the dog was not broken, and he was wrong about Danny in the essential way, which was that she was not a liability." He adjusted. He did it without fanfare and without apology until the apology was specific and private and the adjustment was real. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, a kind of integrity. Leo Harlan learned more slowly than Turow, and more genuinely than anyone expected given his starting position. He asked Danny questions at the end of the deployment that he could not have asked 4 weeks earlier, because 4 weeks earlier he had not yet admitted to himself that he had things to learn. He would not have admitted that at the start. He admitted it after the mountain operation, specifically after he saw the child stop crying. He never said directly that this was what changed it for him. He did not need to. Jake Turow moved to Danny's side at the outbuilding without being asked. That is the sentence that matters. Every other sentence about Turow is context for that one. Ghost at the end of this story is 7.5 years old. He is at the upper range of optimal operational deployment age for a dog in his role, which means the conversation about his future will begin within the next year. Danny is part of that conversation, and she knows it, and she does not look away from it. She told Webb once during a quiet moment in the facility that when the time came, she intended to make sure Ghost went to a home where he would be understood the way he deserved to be understood. Not just managed, understood. Webb asked her what that would look like. She said it would look like someone who learned to read the signals instead of demanding he stop sending them. The mission that will be remembered most from this story is not the evaluation, though the evaluation is what changed the unit's internal direction. The mission that will be remembered is the mountain operation, and specifically the 40 seconds between when Ghost flagged the outbuilding and when Danny and Turow moved toward it. 40 seconds in which a woman trusted a dog and a man trusted a woman he had not fully trusted yet, and together they walked toward something they could not fully see in the dark on a cold mountain because the dog said so. The personnel recovery subject was debriefed twice, once on the ground and once at the receiving facility, and he asked both times about the dog. He wanted to know the dog's name. He was told Ghost. He repeated it. He said in Dari, through the interpreter, that the dog had looked at his daughter and the dog had understood that she was afraid, and the dog had changed how it was standing to make her not afraid anymore. He said he did not know what kind of dog did that. He said he did not know that dogs could decide to do that. The interpreter said she did not know either. Danny, when she was told about this exchange, was quiet for a long time. Then she said Daniel knew. She left it there. Some things are not meant to be resolved completely. Some things are meant to be carried because the carrying of them is itself the meaning. Daniel Arroyo built something extraordinary and died before he could see what it became, and what it became was this: a unit changed, a dog understood, a woman trusted, a child no longer afraid. Ghost does not know that any of this will be written down or remembered. He knows the work, and he knows the people who do the work with him, and he knows whether the morning is a working morning or a rest morning, and he knows Danny's footsteps from 50 feet away, by sound and by scent and by some layer of recognition that is not fully explained by either. He knows when she is worried, and he does a specific thing when she is worried, which is that he moves to a position slightly closer to her without being invited, not touching, not demanding attention, just present. That is what the Kandahar Protocol ultimately looked like in practice. Not a method, not a doctrine, not a tactical framework, though it was all of those things. It looked like a dog who moved slightly closer when the person he trusted needed it, and a person who learned to notice. There is a debate that happens sometimes in the hallways of training command, now that the protocol review is underway, about whether the critical variable is the dog or the method or the handler. It is a good professional debate, and it has not been resolved. Brick, when asked, says the critical variable is the handler's willingness to be wrong. Thoreau, when asked, says the critical variable is the 40 seconds before the outbuilding, which he describes simply as the moment when all three of them were in agreement about something without anyone saying a word. Harlan, when asked, says he is still learning to read the signals and therefore cannot answer with confidence yet, which is perhaps the most honest thing he has said in this entire story. Webb, when asked, says the critical variable is ghost. Danny does not answer when asked. She looks at the dog and the dog looks back at her, and neither of them says anything, and it is enough. If this story moves something in you, subscribe right now and leave a comment below. Tell us where you are watching from, tell us what part stayed with you, tell us what you think about what it costs to be trusted and what it costs when trust breaks, and what it means when a dog waits 6 hours at a staging point for a man who is not coming back and then gets up and does the work anyway. Those are the conversations worth having. We will be here for them.